Alright, before I hop into some matches for today, or this week, this league, whatever you want to call it, I wanted to go over a couple changes in the sideboard, or I guess before that we'll just touch really quickly. I dropped the second Thought Scour for the second Forked Bolt. I want more removal for aggro decks because I don't want to say aggro overall is hard, but the humans matchup, I don't know if you want to call it practicing, testing, whatever word you like to use for jamming a bunch of games against humans, and it's really rough. Maybe looting made it a bit better. I don't know, to be fair. It's not like I had a real sample size. It was probably like 10 to 15. But I don't think the Delver side won more than 3 or 4. It was very difficult. And the ones that Delver does win, at least from my experience in those games, were the ones where humans just stumbles really hard. We disrupt them just a touch, and then we run them over. When humans actually does its thing, even if we try to disrupt them, it did not go well. So I'm thinking humans is just a bad matchup, and that's probably because they run something like 35 creatures, and they work very well together, so they're probably going to have 2 or 3 stick, do some synergy, and then kill us, which is unfortunate because we don't run 35 pieces of removal. We have one. Hooting Mandrills is hiding behind here. I just had it like this because I want to talk about the sideboard in a bit. We've got 1, technically 2, call it 5 with the Vapor Snags, and now 7 of these, so 12. So after my small change, we have 12 if you count Vapor Snag and Snapcaster Mage, which not particularly fantastic. And normally Teamer's probably fine with that because we got Goyfs, we got Mandrills, we got Elemental tokens. We have ways of blocking in combat. That's what Teamer does. It uses its creatures. Well, they have a lot of flying and a lot of ways to put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on guys and then make them 5/5s and 6/6s that are very cheap on mana, and then we just die. So anyways, also having 6 cards in your deck that do basically nothing against them really hurts. Well, that's 5. There's the 6th. Counterspells aren't good against humans, but we know that already. Let's talk about the sideboard. Alpine Moon and Damping Sphere. For this league, we're not going to run any Blood Moons. Kind of sacrilege, maybe a little blasphemous, but I've heard very good things about Damping Sphere against Tron, and consequently also Storm and KCI, so I'm totally down to try that. And I would probably go 3 Sphere or 2 Sphere 1 Moon, but we have this other moon that just dropped in M19. 1 red mana. As it enters the battlefield, choose a non-basic land card name. Lands the opponent controls, which is basically not relevant with our deck because we don't run utility lands, but it's something to know. Lands that they control lose all land types and abilities and gain tap, add 1 mana of any color. It's not Blood Moon. It does not make all non-basics into mountains, so it's not the same mana denial card that I used to run, and very well may run in the next league, who knows. But it says 1 mana, turn off Tron. It changes the land types of any Tron land that you pick. Removes the land type, and supposedly within the rules, how that works is Tron lands check land type, not land name. So when your opponent's Urza's Tower says controls Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, it's not referring to the name of the card, but the type line along there, where this says enchantment, or I guess it's a subtype, so say instead of human werewolf there, it's looking at that, not the part that says Huntmaster of the Fells. So for 1 red mana, we get to turn off Tron, which seems a lot better in the Tron matchup to me than spending 3 red mana to turn off Tron. To be fair, Blood Moon also cuts them off of colors, but a very large portion of Tron is colorless, especially now that the mono-green version is a lot more popular than black-green, red-green, blue Tron, you name it. So I think being able to spend 1 red... You can play it on turn 1, follow up with a Goyf. You can go Delver on 1, Delver plus this on 2, Delver on 1, Goyf on 2, Mana Leak plus this on 3. It's a tempo card. Blood Moon is more of a mid-rangey, say, stompy kind of play this card, lock them out of the game effect. Alpine Moon is just, I'm going to disrupt you a little bit. It's really cheap, so I get to keep my tempo going. So you get to add more threats or disruption as well as playing this. Another thing that's not super relevant, but it's definitely relevant to an extent, is it doesn't mess with our mana. So we can happily get Stomping Ground, Steam Vents, Breeding Pool, slam this, and say, I can cast my spells just fine, how about you? Now, Tron can definitely blow up Alpine Moon, as well as Damping Sphere, and we already know they can blow up Blood Moon. Damping Sphere does a similar thing. I'm assuming people are fairly familiar with it at this point, but if a land taps for more than 1 mana, it produces 1 colorless instead of anything else. And each spell you cast, both players, costs 1 more for each other spell that they cast. So it's kind of like one-sided Storm, sort of a cumulative upkeep way where the first spell costs whatever it costs, and the second one's +1, the third one's +2, third one's +3. So if you try to go Visions, Pierce, Lightning Bolt with that out, it's 1 for Visions, 2 for Pierce, 3 for Bolt, so instead of 3 mana, it's 6 mana. Did I say that right? Yes, I said that right. Okay. So basically, I think I like Alpine Moon more than Damping Sphere against Tron, because Damping Sphere slows down both players in terms of casting spells, while slowing them down in terms of them losing Tron. So they both cut the Tron player off of Tron, but Damping Sphere also says it has that cumulative one-sided storm, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, so that the Tron player probably isn't casting that many spells in one turn. I mean, they might want to chain eggs, to be fair, if they're digging for their nature's claim to blow this up, or they're just trying to hit land drops so they can slam O-Stone, Wormcoil, something like that. So that clause does hurt them, but we have 29 1-mana spells in our deck. This hurts us a lot, I think. I've played a little bit of it in the open tournament practice rooms on MTGO, in between that last league I played, well, the first league I played with the looting version of this deck. And I don't remember if I ever even saw Damping Sphere, and I doubt I played against Tron that much. Definitely a little bit. But anyways, I think it's going to really hurt us, because if I play this on 2, let's say we lead on Delver on 1, Damping Sphere on 2. Turn 3, we want to go Visions plus Goyf. Well, you can't. You can go Visions plus 1 mana spell. If you're chaining cantrips, this gets even worse. Visions into Faithless Looting now costs 3 mana. If you want to cast another spell, it's costing whatever its mana cost is +2. Snapcaster Mage gets worse with it. 2 mana for Snapcaster Mage, mana cost +1 for whatever the next card is. You can no longer Snap Bolt, Snap Denial, Snap Visions on 3 mana. So I think this is going to be a real cost. That's why I think Alpine Moon's going to, well, on its face, if you assume that the Tron player is hurt less by the additional costs to cast spells under the sphere than we are, then Alpine Moon is by default the better card against Tron. But anyways, Damping Sphere also has use, though, against decks like KCI and Storm. Now, I'm fully aware that this is going to get blown up or bounced probably most of the time, but I'm hoping this is enough to slow down the combo decks to bridge us into casting our counter spells or just burning them out. So, I've heard good things about it. I'm willing to believe those things are true and statistically factual, let's say. So, I'm hoping it's really good. I'm totally down to just be way better against Storm and KCI than I otherwise would be, so we're going to try it out. Alpine Moon I really wanted to run because, well, I was initially going 3 Damping Spheres after I heard about it being good, but then I remembered Alpine Moon was coming out soon, so I looked that up real quick to just confirm what the text on it was, and this just sounds bonkers against Tron. It's 1 mana turn off Tron. Sure, they can Nature's Claim it, but they're going to claim your Sphere and your Blood Moon anyways, so You're just spending less mana to lose your thing. It's easier to Nature's Claim than Blood Moon because it doesn't turn off dual lands, which Mono Green Tron actually doesn't run. So that's actually entirely irrelevant. Now that I think about it, I'm gonna look up a Mono Green Tron list actually right now. I already have MTG Goldfish up, so let's see the breakdown here at the non-basics. Yeah, they don't play dual lands. They wouldn't play dual lands. Black-green plays things like Llanowar Wastes, and I'm going to figure it out. Blooming Marsh, bam, that's the fast land. So I could see Blood Moon being debatably better there, but against Mono Green Tron, I think Alpine Moon might actually be strictly better than Blood Moon as well. Do they play Eldrazi? They don't play a lot of Eldrazi. Sometimes you see Thought-Knot Seers. Apparently those come out of the sideboard sometimes. That's what MTG Goldfish says. So Blood Moon, technically it's going to be post-board anyways. Blood Moon is debatably better against Tron if, against the Mono Green Tron deck, I should be very specific when I say this, if, and apparently only if, they actually find Thought-Knot Seer, whereas otherwise none of the spells in this list require colorless mana, it's all generic. So turning their Tron lands into mountains as opposed to turning their... Okay, never mind. It lets them add 1 mana of any color. Just ignore the last 2 minutes of what I was saying. That's not completely wrong. What the facts that I mentioned were absolutely correct. My interpretation of Alpine Moon being strictly better than Blood Moon is not, because I neglected to mention, at least at this part of the video, I did say it earlier, then totally forgot about it, because, yep, it lets whatever Tron land you pick add 1 mana of any color, which turns their colorless sources into green and black sources to make Dismember less painful, or find green mana for Ancient Stirring, Sylvan Scrying, that kind of thing. Now, something I do want to touch on with regards to that, Tron plays 4 Expedition Map, 4 Chromatic Sphere, 4 Chromatic Star, and I believe that's it for the eggs and the colorless land searching. Yes, it is. So that's 12 ways to make green mana or find a basic forest. And that's not including if they decided to use Sylvan Scrying or Ancient Stirrings to grab a forest beforehand, because maybe they actually want to play around Blood Moon, something to that effect. So they have 12 ways to make green mana while this or Blood Moon is down. So I really don't think it's actually going to be that relevant. I have watched a bit of Tron on streams, and it is definitely relevant. They don't always have green mana or black mana when they're on the black variant, when they have those kinds of cards stuck in their hand. So it's entirely possible, if this is a Blood Moon, you throw it down against Tron, they'll have Nature's Claim stuck in their hand, maybe all 3 of them, and they just won't be able to cast it because they can't find their eggs or their map. But I'm assuming a very sizable portion of the time they're going to have access to green mana soon enough that this isn't that relevant, and I think being 1 mana is incredibly relevant. So I'm going to stand behind my idea that this is theoretically better than Blood Moon. We're going to find out probably during the course of the next few leagues. I don't think I'm going to take this out until I decide that Blood Moon is just definitely better, or if Damping Sphere just completely overperforms, we'll drop this. So Alpine Moon, I want against Tron. I want Sphere against Tron, KCI Storm, ad nauseum as well, because it sounds good against them. I've heard people say it's good. Another thing I realized when I was updating my sideboard guide, because I had 3 Damping Spheres in my most recent revision, and I was cutting that for this. Alpine Moon comes in, I think, theoretically against mid-range decks, control decks, such as Jeskai. I want it, because I want to board out all my Vapor Snags and the Dismember against Jeskai. And I have Huntmaster, Snapcaster Mage, and where is it? There's the 3rd card I like against Jeskai, not Basilisk Collar, Deprive. So these 3 cards I like against control, but I have 4 cards I want to cut. So I was thinking of trying a Blood Moon to fit it in somewhere. Then I figured Alpine Moon's not as good, but it has that same kind of turn-off Celestial Colonnade effect. It's definitely worse in the long game because Blood Moon is good at cutting them off of Supreme Verdict, Cryptic Command, sometimes even Path, blue spells altogether if they don't play around it. So I think Blood Moon is definitely better, but I do think Alpine Moon is almost certainly better than Dismember against a deck like Jeskai, whereas Dismember can try to kill the Colonnade, whereas Alpine Moon, you can play proactively, it doesn't get countered by Dispel. You can play it when they tap out. They're almost never... Actually, no. They will straight up never be tapped out unless they really want to when they're activating Celestial Colonnade because it has Vigilance. So unless they attack, tap the Colonnade for something, and then you Dismember, they will always have at least the blue-white mana up. So I think Alpine Moon's better at that job. So I'm totally willing to board it in there. I feel like it might be okay against Jund as well. Turn off Raging Ravines for 1 red seems decent. It does fix their mana a little bit, but unless they're playing around Blood Moon, Jund's mana is almost always fantastic. They can have plenty of colors. They have fast lands, they have shock lands, they have fetch lands. Jund's fine. Jund doesn't need our help in terms of the mana. And then I got to thinking, this is good against man lands. I should board it in against Affinity. I really like the idea of Alpine Moon against Affinity, and it might actually, if it proves to be good enough, I'm dropping this Ancient Grudge like a hot potato. Not both Ancient Grudges, but if this is good enough against Affinity, I don't think we need the second. Alpine Moon against Affinity reads red mana, all Inkmoth Nexus or Inkmoth Nexi or Blinkmoth Nexi can no longer be animated and now tap for any color. Affinity has some colored mana requirements, but not very much, and if they have a Mox Opal or Springleaf Drum, it's basically null and void that this helps them. And you can turn off 4 Blinkmoth or Inkmoth Nexi for a single red mana. That's insane. If they dump a bunch of Ravager tokens, Ravager counters, sorry, on one of their manlands, and then you play this the next turn, they can no longer animate that creature. Those counters are gone. That Ravager was basically wasted. So I think we might actually see some lines where we try to bait the opponent into putting their counters onto a manland, untap, and then boom, Alpine Moon. It sounds fantastic to me. I like the idea. I might like it enough to play 2. I think that's probably not happening. This would have to be not great against Tron for me to go to 2 of these, I think. And since I've already heard that this is pretty good, we're going to test it and find out, basically. So, if I want to Alpine Moon, I don't think you can actually fit that. Let me pull up my sideboard spreadsheet on here. We're looking at the Looting with a Focused Board tab. It's now the first one because it's the one I'm working on. So, against Affinity right now, with my current sideboard, I'm boarding in 11 cards. The Artifact Hate, Snapcaster Mage, Rejection, Alpine Moon, all the sweepers, Basilisk Collar for some life gain. Death Touch might matter, but probably not nearly as much as the life gain, and Huntmaster. Cards that are coming out are a couple of Pyromancers. Blocking with tokens probably isn't going to be fantastic. If they see it in Game 1, I'm assuming they're going to board in Whip Flare. Not Serum Visions. The One Thought Scour's coming out because we're interacting a lot. Traverse, because I'd rather have interaction than that. Couple Vapor Snags. Couple Spell Pierce, Mana Leak. And the 2 Stubborn Denials, because I think cards like Ancient Grudge, obviously Ceremonious Rejection, Pyroclasm Anger, I think those are better than counters against Affinity. Now, normally I was keeping 1 Stubborn Denial in because I didn't have that Alpine Moon to bring in. So right now, I'm boarding out the second Stubborn Denial, and I guess you could even say the first Stubborn Denial because they're both gone. But I actually kind of almost like Denial against them because late game it counters top-decked Platings, and I always forget the name of it. Metalcraft, Burn Spell for 4, otherwise does 2. It doesn't matter. We all know what the card does. So Denial's actually not that bad in early game. Sometimes on 1, you could even nab a cranial plating. Maybe they don't have that fast of a start. You nab it on turn 2, that kind of thing. So I actually kind of like Stubborn Denial. It's at least decent. So I feel like I'm almost overboarding for this matchup now because this card is at least okay. Spell Pierce is probably... Well, maybe it's worse than Denial. Affinity usually ends up going for the most expensive play because they're just that explosive, so I feel like Denial's fine in the early game as well. Vapor Snag I'm okay with, I think, 1 or 2, but we just have better interaction. So I feel like Vapor Snag's a decent card, Denial's a decent card. We're just upgrading things. And depending on how good the affinity matchup is, we don't need to do that. Maybe having these slightly better, or to be fair, decently or much better pieces of interaction just increases the affinity matchup from, just by a few percent kind of thing. Whereas I would rather drop, say, an Ancient Grudge, lose those couple percent against affinity, and play a narrow, powerful card for, say, Jund, blue-white, or maybe something to hose humans, burn, something like that. So I'm not sure. It really depends on how the affinity and KCI matchups are, Lantern included, but I don't think it's that popular. So if it turns out that we just have so many cards that we're just throwing Artifact Hate out the wazoo during games, and we're just shredding affinity left and right, which is a very good problem to have, I admit. But if it turns out that we are overboarding, I think we're definitely going to cut down on some of that, use the slot for something else. Anyways, what else am I talking about? Snapcaster Mage is taking the place of Vendilion Click. I'm pretty sure I had Click in for the first league, so let's talk about that for a second. With Damping Sphere in the board, matchups like KCI and Storm have a lot of cards that I want to board in. We've got these counter spells, this for KCI. Storm, we've got the Damping Spheres for both. I kind of like having a couple sweepers against Storm, at least one. And our main deck's already good against decks like that. Against Storm, I'm only really boarding out Vapor Snag, Dismember, Traverse, because burn spells go to the face and kill their dudes. Counter spells slow them down. Threats kill them. That's what our deck is. Our deck is basically made to beat spell-based combo decks. So I'm not boarding out anything that's actually good against Storm. I'm not going to run, say, a third Damping Sphere so that I can board out a Stubborn Denial for it. Even though you're not going to board out the Denial, it's probably maybe a Pyromancer if you think your clock's good enough. I doubt you would board out the Thought Scour because that's helping get Mandrills out. Maybe you board out a Forked Bolt, but I think I'd rather have Forked Bolt because I think it's a waste. I don't think you gain enough trading Forked Bolt for Damping Sphere as you do having that extra slot the third Damping Sphere would take. Say we cut Huntmaster for Damping Sphere because we decided Huntmaster was the next worst card in the board. So now our mid-range matchups get worse, our aggro matchups get worse, and those are the matchups that we actually need the help in because we have these counter spells that sometimes don't do anything. These Vapor Snags that are sometimes good, sometimes bad. Maybe Dismember does a really bad job because they're just too fast, too aggressive. And we actually need to get those cards out, but now we can't because we no longer have Huntmaster. Now we have the third Damping Sphere. So that's something I wanted to touch on. I have basically too many cards for combo now, or rather, debatably just enough, but if I had the third Damping Sphere, I probably would be boarding in one fewer card because I don't really want to board out any more cards against decks like KCI. I'm looking at my sideboard guide right now. It's on the other monitor. Storm, like I said, I'm boarding out those 5. I'm not excited to really even touch anything else. Against KCI, we're dropping Traverse, a few burn spells because they're not great, the Snags, and the Dismember. 4 cards. We have Artifact Hate to bring in, Deprive and Rejection, the Snapcaster Mage now, which used to be a Vendilion Click, and the 2 Damping Spheres. So originally I had 3 Damping Spheres and dropped Click for Snapcaster Mage. Then I dropped the Damping Sphere for Alpine Moon, and I'm realizing that Snapcaster Mage is probably as good as Click, if not better, against combo, so I may as well bring that in as well. If it turns out that I don't want the second Snapcaster Mage against them, I'm probably just boarding out one fewer Lightning Bolt. I imagine Snapcaster Mage replaced Click because even before I realized I kind of wanted it against KCI to at least try, and I think I'm also boarding it in against Storm. I just checked. Snapcaster Mage is good against mid-range decks, which is basically the reason I was playing Click in the first place. It's good against combo, it's good against mid-range. So it's sort of like an almost mid-range Haymaker that also gains us some points against combo, except I have so many cards that are good against combo that I'm not boarding it in for Storm or KCI, which are some of the biggest combo matchups. So I'm basically just running it for mid-range, which I think personally is absurd, because I don't think, in my experience at least, Click has not been good enough to warrant a slot if it's only for mid-range, and control obviously, but same thing, I don't think it's been good enough, whereas Snapcaster Mage, we know it's great against mid-range and control. I've seen it as well post-board now that I threw it in for those tournament practice room matches I've been playing. And it's another card that filled up all the cards I have against Affinity. I wasn't boarding Click in against Affinity. They have a bunch of 1/1 flyers. It seems awful. Snapcaster Mage is great against Affinity. Bring that in. Other matchup I planned on bringing it in initially in terms of aggro is Humans. By cutting Vendilion Click, which is a really expensive way to maybe trade with a Mantis Rider if they don't have Hierarch or a Thalia's Lieutenant, I lost that, and in turn, I got Snapcaster Mage, which is, it jump blocks almost at the worst in terms of the body, and flashes back a removal spell. So it's like a 1-for-1 that also fogs a creature, or maybe the 2/1 even trades for one of their creatures, which makes it a straight-up 2-for-1, which is gas. So I think Snapcaster Mage is much better in that slot than Click. Did I change anything else? I'm almost positive Feed the Clan was here. Actually, I can check that. If I leave this deck, actually, it's going to get resorted, and we don't want that. I don't think I had Clan in there. It's in here now because I want to make the burn matchup a bit better. It's one of those popular matchups. That's what I've heard. And if I have the slot, great. If it turns out that I just don't need this against burn and Basilisk Collar, Huntmaster, counter spells, stuff like that is good enough, then this is another card like the Ancient Grudge. Maybe I'm overboarding, but I'm only boarding in 4 or 5 cards against burn, so I'm going to assume that I'm not overboarding against them. But if I am, Feed the Clan can get right out of there. It's also nice against Scapeshift, because it can get you out of Scapeshift range, which is nice. But I'm sure we've got more stuff that can take that slot. So Feed the Clan or Ancient Grudge, depending on how our next probably 15, 20, whatever matches go, the next 3, 4, 5 leagues, basically, these cards are on the chopping block, not because I think they're bad, but because I think I have so many good cards, and I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe, just maybe, I actually constructed my 75 well enough that the sideboard goes really well with the main deck, and everything just flows so nicely during boarding, and we have all of these cards that hit multiple matchups in such a nice way that, okay, Alpine Moon's not really like that, but that, EE for sure, EE, Snapcaster Mage, Huntmaster, Basilisk Collar, they're basically my pride and joy at this point, because they hit so many matchups, and it's really nice. They do a lot of work in this sideboard, so if it turns out that our artifact matchup or our burn matchup are so good that we're just wasting slots on either of these cards, they can hit the road. Maybe we'll throw Blood Moon back in for a little extra mid-range Haymaker action. Maybe we go back to Bedlam Reveler. Who knows? I don't know how much Graveyard Hate's in the meta right now. I haven't played all that much Magic recently, so who knows? Maybe Graveyard Hate is on a downtick. Although KCI was really, I don't want to say it broke out because I don't remember. I wasn't super into Magic. I was on, I don't want to call it a hiatus, but I was on a, let's call it a mini break when KCI became really good Apparently, they discovered that interaction that makes it super broken. Okay, maybe not broken, but it makes it unintuitively good. So I don't actually know if KCI is still on an uptick or maybe it's on a downtick now, which means maybe there's less graveyard hate. So maybe I should have a Bedlam Reveler. Who knows? I don't. Let's find out. I think that's enough to go over the sideboard. If anybody wants to discuss anything, I always love discussing the deck, so leave a comment, message me somewhere, the MTG Salvation forum, MTG Salvation just messages, get in contact with me on YouTube, the Delver Discord, whatever you like. I'm always happy to talk about the deck and theoretically make it better, play better. So yeah, I'm going to play some matches. I'll see you guys imminently.